religious freedom is a concept that many Christians, I think, assume we should promote and defend and champion. And in some ways, I totally understand that. We should be free as Christians to worship the one true God, to practice the true religion, Christianity. But the concept of freedom of religion, as it is used and applied in our American constitutional, man-made legislative system, goes far beyond that. And it actually becomes a Trojan horse. And in fact, if you go to Future of Christendom's YouTube page, there's a talk I did a couple years ago on freedom of religion as it relates to abortion and how this concept is a Trojan horse. And I do believe it is. I do believe freedom of religion is not a concept we should be championing. And recently there was a story shared by Alan Maricle, who's from Oklahoma and was at the last Future of Christendom conference. And he shared this article about a legislator in Oklahoma who's promoting a bill that is promoted under the auspices of freedom of religion. And yet, I think this is another clear example of a Trojan horse. I'm not going to go through the whole argument I made in the other video back on about abortion. You can find that on Future of Christendom's YouTube page. But I want to talk about this bill that is being put forth, because this is another example of why we don't need man-made legislation. Alan Maricle posted this story, and then he posted a comment. I want to read his comment. But then Luke Saint responded and said, abolish the legislature. And Alan Maricle said, happily. So even though Alan Maricle and Luke Saint debated the immigration issue last year, I think they're on the same page on this topic here, especially as it relates to this piece of legislation. Another example of why God's law is supreme. And once you grant man, as John Locke said, the supreme power to make law, and John Locke said that was a good thing, but if you give man the authority and power to create law, it never ends. And I won't read the whole article, but I'll link it here. But it's interesting that what Todd Gallagher, this legislator in Oklahoma, is saying is it's time to modernize the law. The founding fathers gave us this concept of religious freedom, and we even had a law on the books from 1910, I think, in Oklahoma. But we need to modernize this. That law is not enough. We need to modernize the law for the current context. And now, I argue, this law is going to be used as another Trojan horse to potentially persecute and prosecute the righteous. And this is the problem with man-made law. You have to constantly be changing it because it's not sufficient. God's law is sufficient, and it doesn't mean that you don't need wisdom and prudence. This is discussed at length on Future of Christendom and also at the Lancaster Patriot podcast, that you need wisdom and prudence in adjudication, not in legislation. And this, I think, is a good example. So I'll try to keep this brief because I think this is a great example of what happens when we have a system where men and women are creating laws in order to protect a principle, a vague principle. So the principle here is the freedom of religion, religious freedom, right? It's a principle that in some ways is a good thing, but when it is used to promote and protect false religion, it's a bad thing. And that's why I argue it's a Trojan horse, that biblically, the idea of freedom of religion is subservient to righteousness and justice. Biblical law does not place an extremely high premium on religious freedom. And you know this because biblical law does not authorize you to commit open idolatry, to do your religious practice of child sacrifice. That was part of the religion of the day. And that is one of the things I bring up in that talk on abortion, that the modern adherents to abortion that are arguing that religious freedom should be used to protect them are saying this is one of our religious practices. The sacrifice of a child is part of our religion. So freedom of religion is not a primary concept in Christianity and biblical law. It's secondary. Primary is righteousness and justice. And freedom of religion, really, the only freedom we have ultimately is to practice the true religion. So from God's perspective, we have no freedom to practice a false religion. When it comes to the state and the civil realm, the state is the civil magistrate, I should say, is limited in what he can punish. But certainly there are aspects of things that the magistrate will be authorized to punish that would be seen as an infringement upon the American ideal of freedom of religion. But this is what happens. This bill is what happens when a principle becomes our driving force that we make our legislation based upon. And that principle is the freedom of religion. And once you start to do that, once you make laws based on a principle, we're done when it comes to justice. Because the magistrate's job is to establish justice. Justice and justice only you shall follow, it says in Deuteronomy 16:20. Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2 in the New Testament affirm the idea that the magistrate's job is to punish the evildoer, not to promote concepts. And this is what happens when you say the magistrate's job is to promote concepts for the common good. Freedom of religion would be good for the society. Therefore, the magistrate can make laws to promote it. And that's disastrous. And that's what happens here. So let me just read a portion of this and then I'll wrap up here. So this is from Oklahoma City. Legislation authored by Senator Todd Gallagher, Republican, Kellyville, to modernize and strengthen protections for religious liberty in Oklahoma advanced this week, reinforcing a constitutional right first granted by the Founding Fathers and enshrined in Oklahoma law for more than a century. So he's putting forward this bill in order to modernize and enshrine this concept that goes back to the Founding Fathers and Oklahoma law for more than a century. It's not good enough what was written. We need to modernize it so now it can be used, and let's see how it'll be used. Senate Bill 743 updates and strengthens existing state law to deter intentional disruptions of religious services. The bill expands the definition of criminal disturbance to include protests or demonstrations that lack proper licensure, ensuring houses of worship remain protected spaces for peaceful assembly. It also establishes clear consequences. A first offense would be a misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in county jail and a $500 fine, while repeat offenses would rise to felony status with penalties of up to 2 years in state prison and a $1,000 fine. And also, I'll stop right there, but I want to read a comment from Alan Maricle. So this bill is basically, we got to strengthen these old laws about religious freedom. And if you're found to be disrupting a religious service, you could be locked up and put in prison. Now, I want to read a comment here from Alan Maricle, who posted this, and he's not a fan of this legislation. And Alan Maricle said this: "This law would outlaw any public speech that could be construed as protest in any community of any size in Oklahoma. Since there is no location within any community that is more than a mile from any church building, it is ridiculous. Todd Gallagher is doing the work of the devil here, which is no surprise since he played an influential role in killing the Bill of Abolition this year. He is upset because members of the public dared call him to repentance and dared to alert his local assembly of his perfidy and wickedness." So I think what's happening here, and I'm just reading this from the surface, is that Todd Gallagher opposed an abolition bill, and Alan Maricle and maybe some others went to outside his church or near his church and maybe did some open air preaching. And according to Alan Maricle, Todd didn't like that. And so now you see how this law can be used. Let's just assume that there's a synagogue of Satan, a false church, or something else. It could be a synagogue of modern Talmudic Judaism. It could be a mosque. And this law can be used now against Christians who are proclaiming the true religion, the gospel of Christ, in the public, because now they are violating, quote unquote, the concept of freedom of religion by making people who are following that false religion feel uncomfortable. And that is why when man makes law, it's so dangerous. This will be used against the righteous. If what Alan is saying is true, we can even see it here that it will be used against those who would be proclaiming the truth about abortion, that it is murder, that it is the shedding of innocent blood. But if they're doing so in some sort of geographical proximity, potentially, without the proper license, well, now they're breaking the man-made law and they could go to jail. This is why man-made law is such a danger. This is why it is not authorized in Scripture. This is why we don't need the legislature. As I said, Luke Saint commented, abolish the legislature. This law does not promote righteousness and justice, which is the role of the magistrate. It only provides the wicked with a loophole or a tool to bludgeon the righteous with. So this is not a good thing. So much more could be said there. I encourage you to check out that talk on freedom of religion. And also, this bill apparently started out as some sort of bill related to prostitution. I don't have time to get into that now, but laws about prostitution are also used against the righteous, not maybe in the way, or actually I was thinking more of pornography bills, but even prostitution bills can be used against the righteous or against those who are oppressed. When in the Bible, you don't have laws against prostitution per se. Anyway, check out the talk I did on pornography, where I talked about Dusty Devers, who's also from Oklahoma, and just again how man-made law, though it may come from a place of good intentions, and I'm not sure if this one does, may come from a place of good intentions. Whenever man creates law in order to protect a concept or a principle, it leads to the persecution of the righteous. And I think this is a clear case of this. Evil men do not understand justice. And when you give evil men in the legislatures the role of promoting concepts and protecting principles, they will inevitably create laws that can be used by the wicked to punish the righteous. So that's my concern with this. Let me know what you think. If you're in Oklahoma, definitely want to hear your thoughts on this. But these are the types of legislation that are being passed all across this nation. And the concerning thing is that many of them are passed with the applause of Christians who say, yeah, we need religious freedom. This is a good thing. And they don't realize that they're letting in a Trojan horse that will be used against them and their children and their grandchildren, against faithful Christians who want to proclaim the Lordship of Christ. All right, that's all for today. Thanks for listening. Let me know your thoughts. Bye.